My son is dead and you are going back to your parents' house, aren't you? We live in this house. My dear husband Ted suddenly passed away. Immediately after the funeral, my parents-in-law, my husband's parents, visited me in my grief. Although there were not many of them, this house was filled with memories of living with my husband. Why on earth would I have to leave? But I didn't have time to cry, my mother-in-law told me in an uncharacteristic tone of voice. My name is Holly. I am an office worker for a real estate agency. It was at the real estate agency where I work that I met my dear husband, Ted. He is the brother of a male coworker of mine and they are very close as brothers. They often came to visit each other since they worked close to each other. We worked in the same office and I am also close to my colleague who later became my brother-in-law. That was how he introduced me to his own brother. Eventually, his brother invited me to lunch with him and we began to spend more and more time together. I recognized Ted as a nice, bright guy with whom I could talk. I was not particularly conscious of him. One day, when I thought it was the same for him too, an event occurred that triggered a change in our relationship. My colleague had made a reservation for us to meet at a restaurant, but he was unable to join us due to urgent business. However, it would have been a waste to cancel the reservation. So, for the first time, we had an opportunity to be alone together. I later learned that the brothers had arranged to do that on that day. My brother-in-law had been asked by my brother to plan so that we could be alone together. The conversation was lively, partly because of the delicious food, our backgrounds and values, etc. I noticed that we quickly became very close to each other. The more I learned about his life, the more I was drawn to his warm smile. Our relationship changed after that day. It did not take long for us to get married. It would not have been possible without my brother-in-law's arrangement. In that sense, and in the events that will happen in the future, I cannot thank him enough. Then came the day of our meeting with my parents-in-law. I was filled with anxiety, but my in-laws welcomed me very calmly. They were very considerate and I began to relax. I'm so glad you're here. We were really looking forward to meeting you, Holly. We've cooked a lot of food for you, hoping that today would be a good day. My mother-in-law says this and takes care of me in many ways. My in-laws are very independent people, just like my husband, who is the eldest son, and they were very friendly. I was relieved and grateful that I was able to enjoy my time at my in-laws' house. Even after several interactions, my in-laws were just supportive of our happiness. They have maintained a distance from us, not pushing us to get married or have children. Eventually, there was talk of moving in together at my in-laws' house. We had plans to build a house. Actually, my grandfather left us his house. I explained, and my in-laws listened intently and nodded. My grandfather loved me very much because I was his only granddaughter. Finally, he inherited me a piece of land with a magnificent house that he had renovated perfectly, even the interior. My grandfather left this world as if he was waiting for the inheritance process to be completed. The land had been redeveloped nearby, and land prices soared because of its location. But having been in the real estate industry for a long time, I knew what was the best thing to do. It would be more helpful in our plans to build our dream house if we were to sell it as drastically as possible rather than live in it ourselves. I appreciate my grandfather's love for us, but he told us that we could live in or sell the house we inherited. We were already contemplating selling it. After we got married, we moved there. However, it is far from where I work, and no matter how good the location is, it is difficult to continue living there. While we were making plans to sell the property, one day our lives underwent a major change. My husband, who works in sales, was ordered to be transferred to another company. He works for a large company with branches all over the country. Even though we are newlyweds, we were told that my husband was the only suitable person for the job, and since it was a resignation, we couldn't refuse the assignment. I'll definitely come home for the holidays. Besides, my parents are coming to visit. You don't have to, but could you take them both somewhere? Your parents are very nice people, and I don't have a problem with them going out. But it will be a while before we can give them the house. My husband will be moving out on his own. Suddenly, I had no choice but to endure my loneliness and worry and wait until the day we could live together again. As my husband had said, my parents-in-law, especially my mother-in-law, came to visit us frequently on their days off. My mother-in-law used to have business trips with my father-in-law. She would tell me how many times she endured loneliness while carrying her young children. You don't have to have children to nurture family memories. Come out with me. You'll feel better after a day of shopping. Let's go, Holly. Thanks to my mother-in-law, I never feel lonely, and in fact, it makes for a busy holiday. However, I began to notice something that bothered me little by little. On my days off from work, my mother-in-law almost always invites me out. That was fine, but by the time a month had passed, my mother-in-law's invitations were a bit pushy. She seemed to have no regard for my fatigue or housework. I want to take this week off. And my mother-in-law would reply, I am sorry. My mother-in-law frowned at me as if I was being selfish. But it's fun to go out with you, isn't it? Or is it that you don't like going out with me? Well, it's not like that. But since you take me out with you every week, you need a day off too, don't you? My mother-in-law looked sad. I hurriedly tried to clear up the misunderstanding, but she would not listen to me at all. When I agreed with her in a bewildered manner, she smiled and said, I'm sorry. She acted as if she had forgotten about my insistent pursuit of her. My suspicions about my mother-in-law's words and actions gradually grew. The only places she would forcibly lure me out to were places where expenses would be heavy. She would take me to brand stores for shopping and expensive meals. I would be made to pay for them. My mother-in-law often leaves the restaurant before I do, and I am forced to pay. She never thanks me for the payment or pays me later. Sure, I have a house and a good salary, so I am not worried about saving. But we've both been trying to save money. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable with my mother-in-law's extravagant behavior. My in-laws would sometimes join us, but even then it was the same thing. Instead, my father-in-law joined in, and my burden only grew heavier. I knew I needed to resolve the problem, but it was difficult to talk to my husband about it. He did tell me that he would be back for the holidays. He is quite busy at his new post and is not able to come home very often. My mother told me you go out every week, are you doing well? Does it seem like there's nothing to worry about? When I connected my husband to the video phone, the dark circles under his eyes and his slightly emaciated cheeks were noticeable. I could tell that he was still tired from work. I felt bad about mentioning my problems with my mother-in-law there, so I tend to show my strength. She's been very good to me. Take care of yourself, Ted. I'm fine, so don't worry about me. I could not refuse to pay for my in-laws' companionship, while I had to play it down with my husband. However, their attitude gradually escalated. Finally, when I insisted that I could not go out today, she said something like this. Well, hey, can you lend me some money? What? I'm going to pay for it? Just a little. It's really just a little bit. I have already made reservations at a restaurant. I'll take friends instead, so can you just pay for what I don't have? I wanted to say no, but then the conversation would get complicated and we would never get anywhere. I gave up and opened my wallet. But I never behaved like this in front of my husband. Why don't you ask Ted to do it for you? It's not dignified to tell Ted. I was surprised to hear her reply. She is too embarrassed to tell her eldest son, so she thinks she can ask his wife for help. I gave up on my mother-in-law a long time ago, and it has become routine for her to ask me for money. At least if I give her money, which she calls an allowance. My mother-in-law would stop forcing me out of the house. I knew this was developing into a big problem. But the inability to have a dialogue with my mother-in-law was wearing me down. My mother-in-law's behavior became more and more inexplicable and strange. She would arrive unexpectedly and without prior notice, and then she would look at my house inside and out. I felt as if the privacy of my home was being invaded. I wonder if this furniture was left by Holly's grandfather. What's with all this furnishings? It's wonderful that you can afford to have all this fine stuff. Some of the furniture was left behind, antiques that my grandfather had favored. My mother-in-law seems to like them. She comes over and admires them as if they were her own. This is my husband's and my mother-in-law's home. I finally began to think about confiding in my mother-in-law. My husband might be surprised, but how nice it would be if we could figure out together how to deal with her. My mother-in-law's behavior is never pleasant. It is an invasion of privacy, no matter how much they may be parents and children-in-law. At the same time, however, my husband's moving was decided. If I just put up with her for a little while longer, he will come home. With my husband there, my parents-in-law would no longer ask me for money. A glimmer of hope sprouted in my heart. My husband is working hard every day, so my patience is almost over. I was looking forward to seeing my husband again, but things took an unexpected turn. What? Ted collapsed and is in the hospital? My mind goes blank. I was contacted by a colleague at my new post, and I rushed to the hospital. Perhaps his busy schedule had gotten the better of him, and suddenly he had a heart attack. Ted was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, but he didn't make it in time. My husband, a man of good health, had a heart attack that no one could have predicted, and he passed away in the blink of an eye. The funeral took place without me being able to accept the reality of the situation. I don't remember much because of the strong sense of loss. My brother-in-law came to the scene and took over most of the chores. I'm sorry. I know you just lost your brother too, but you helped me a lot. It is my brother's funeral, so it is only natural that I should help. But more importantly, are you okay with the land? Did you get the house ready? Toward the end of the funeral, I talked with my brother-in-law while cleaning up. I nodded to him and replied, everything is fine. Then, a few days after my husband's funeral, my in-laws came to visit the house together. But it was blindingly obvious that they had not come to console me. I am sorry about our son's sudden death, but you'll be fine because we're here. Don't worry. For some reason, my mother-in-law's face was smiling and laughing. Even more surprisingly, she had arranged for a truck and inside it was packed with furniture and other belongings of my parents-in-law's house. I was so surprised and confused that I couldn't speak. This was a move, no matter how I looked at it. My mother-in-law and her family were about to move in without consulting me. What could have made them do this? But the answer is obvious. They are not after our land, are they? I was confused, but I put into words the concern that had been on my mind for a long time. My mother-in-law gave me a cold smile. The price of land has gone up a lot. I've been after this house for a long time. I mean, it was this inheritance that allowed you to marry my son. Since it was you who inherited it, I allowed you to marry him. I was speechless, filled with despair. Are you saying that you are going to live with me? What? What nonsense are you talking about? I asked in confusion, and my mother-in-law raised her eyebrows. Ted's death was an unexpected event. In fact, my mother-in-law was going to get the house even if it wasn't. My in-laws are trying to get rid of me and replace me as the owner of this land. And they seem to have assumed on their own that I would leave this house. My son is dead, and you are going back to your parents' house, aren't you? This house will be empty and I feel sorry for you, so we will live in it. So I'm telling you not to worry. My mother-in-law's smile turns into a crooked grin. I pointed out her mistake with trepidation. We've already sold this house, but... I tried not to laugh at my mother-in-law's misunderstanding, but I could not hide my half-smile. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, froze and said, "What?" She froze. Just then, a completely different mover's truck arrived. "Excuse me. We're here to bring the items to your house." Perhaps because a truck from a competitor's company is parked there. The brawny contractor gets out and calls out to us for confirmation. The contractor my mother-in-law had arranged for is also getting out. They must have realized that the work could not be started and that it was not just a matter of another truck coming. We asked my parents-in-law for an explanation, but they were both too flustered to get to the point. We all argued with them, but it didn't help. Seeing my parents-in-law in a panic, I finally began to regain my composure. After that, I instructed them to move the truck out of the way. The house has already been sold to a buyer and a contract has been signed. A new family is moving in, so we can't bring their stuff into someone else's house, can we? Just as the contractors were looking up in amazement, a luxury private car arrived. A wealthy-looking couple and their children got out. The truth is, this land is no longer mine. They are the new owners. The in-laws were increasingly confused and didn't seem to understand what was going on. Please move the truck quickly, so the new tenants can start work. We can't start working on the new tenants. When they managed to move the truck on my mother-in-law's side, the movers immediately got to work. They moved the brand new furniture according to the planned procedure. The mothers-in-law could not accept this and began pestering me at the door. The buyer, the husband, evacuated his family to his car. He rushes over here and asks me questions, and another confusion begins. Who the hell are they? This was bought by our family. And please let the truck go home as soon as possible. I didn't expect my in-laws to visit me. I apologized flatly and managed to get them to forgive me. However, my mother-in-law and her family did not leave. They pushed us out of the way and rushed into the house. But of course, the house had changed from what we had known. There was nothing left of the furniture that we had used. My mother-in-law was astonished at the sight and began to fumigate and make a fuss. What is this? The house is empty. I loved that antique furniture and the lighting. Wait a second. She was outraged, not understanding what was going on. The tenant finally said, "I'm calling the police." He yelled at her. The upset father-in-law runs like a bullet, dragging the mother-in-law to retreat. A short distance away from the scene, my mother-in-law, who had been heated up, let go and quieted down somewhat. I apologized to the resident first. I was told that there was no guarantee that problems would not arise in the future. I managed to get them to release my parents-in-law by withholding their names and addresses. I had a strong sense of exhaustion, but I still had to explain to my parents-in-law. I returned to them. I calmly told them that the move had been completed a few days before my husband's death. The house was originally planned to be sold along with the land, so that was our original plan. We had to stop at one point because my husband had to move out on his own. There is a certain background that allowed us to proceed so smoothly. It was my brother-in-law who supported our decision. I was perplexed by the change in my parents-in-law, who had started asking for money. I didn't want to worry my husband, so I couldn't talk to him about it, and I have been in a state of depression. My brother-in-law noticed this and saved me. He told me that he had a hard time dealing with his parents. He told me that he would help me if I had any problems. I didn't want to damage our marriage or my relationship with my parents-in-law. I trusted my brother-in-law, who promised not to tell anyone, and decided to take the plunge and talk to him about everything. When I asked him about it, he was furious with my parents-in-law. He was my husband's brother and a colleague at my employer. He knew exactly what my parents-in-law were up to. And for my brother-in-law, his brother Ted is the only family he has. His wife, me, is like family to him. My parents will eventually try to live together in that house or conveniently kick them out and try to make it their own. According to my brother-in-law, both of my in-laws are so high-class minded that they are naive. They are vain and will stop at nothing. My mother-in-law in particular is terribly selfish. She pretends to be a nice lady while she is on the outside. But in reality, she is an evil person who thinks only of her own convenience. Because they are blood relatives, the episodes my brother-in-law tells me about his parents-in-law are all very intense. They were trying to make things right in front of his eldest son, who is the heir to the family. My husband probably didn't have to know about his parents-in-law's behavior. Anyway, I was suggested that I should sell the land as soon as possible so that the in-laws would not take it away from me. I agreed with my brother-in-law and decided to proceed with the sale. No matter how dearly my grandfather had left it to me, I did not want the house to be an obstacle to us as a couple. Rather, it was because it was important that I did not want to leave any disasters behind. Of course, it was not an arbitrary decision. I discussed it with my husband before his death, and he agreed. At that time, my husband learned about all of his parents-in-law's activities. I really didn't want to let him know. The sale could not be completed by me alone. But he understood my feelings that I couldn't discuss it with him. And he told me that he could not forgive my parents-in-law's behavior. I'm sorry I didn't realize. If it's okay with Holly, let's get the sale done before my parents make a move. I'm sorry that this house is so important to you, having inherited it from your grandfather. No, you should let it go rather than go through the trouble. My grandfather would agree with me that we should let it go rather than have trouble with it. I decided to sell the land not to get along with my parents-in-law, but to protect my future with my husband. As for the sale, my brother-in-law, who is an expert in real estate, did everything in his power. He helped me find the best buyer. All I had to do was to find a new place to live and move out as soon as possible, and act naturally so that my in-laws would not find out. The house was used as we lived in it, but it was as good as new, and I kept the price down for that reason. That way, we were able to find a buyer right away, and the sale was quickly consummated. That is the family that just arrived. We were actually going to wait for Ted's return at the new house we were moving to. My husband was happy with the sale, which is the only thing I regret. Furniture was being brought in by the contractors. The moving process proceeded steadily, despite the fact that my in-laws had been kicked out of the house. My parents-in-law were not making a fuss, but were watching in amazement. But they could not stay like that forever. The moving company that my parents-in-law had hired was furious and demanded an explanation. From the perspective of the moving company, the move was booked because of an inexplicable mismanagement. I can't believe this is happening. It's a breach of contract. And questioned the in-laws, but they could not explain. In the end, the household goods were taken back once. They said that due to the unexpected situation, they would be charged a significant surcharge. Finally understanding the sequence of events, my mother-in-law shuddered and squirmed at me. This is our house because it's our eldest son's wife's house. Isn't it? Is this strange? She was trying to convince me with a string of painful excuses, but I ignored them. I ignored them and left with only my baggage. The land already belongs to the new family. I have nothing to answer for, since the land already belongs to the new family and not even to me. My husband's memorial services, including the 7th day of the 7th month, went smoothly. I saw my parents-in-law once in a while, but they never said anything to me about the house. They seemed to want to say something to me about the house, but in the end I couldn't say anything to them and they snuck away. I no longer have any obligation to my in-laws. I hardly speak to them anymore because I have no business with them. I go about my day peacefully without incident. In the small house where we were supposed to start over as a couple in a new house, I dealt with the grief of losing my husband. I had a large amount of savings on hand from the sale. Now that Ted is gone, our plans to build a home are off the table. I return to work. I bask in the few memories I have of my husband. I was slowly turning myself over to a more positive outlook. On the other hand, my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, must have been filled with unwilling frustration. I didn't want to be involved anymore, so I didn't even let them know where our new residence was. I could not get involved, and this seemed to add to the frustration of my mother-in-law. She was looking out for her eldest son, and now she couldn't go to her other son, with whom she was not on good terms. On the other hand, she didn't know where I was either. The stresses kept piling up and eventually my mother-in-law lost her equilibrium. Late one night, the mother-in-law committed the heinous act of throwing gasoline around the house that was sold. Fortunately, a neighbor who was passing by became suspicious, and was quickly subdued and saved the day. When the police were called, they found that she had also prepared waste paper and a lighter. The mother-in-law was arrested on suspicion of attempted arson. The husband was almost set on fire. When he found out that it was the woman who came to his house on the day he moved in, he became very angry and called me to tell me that he would definitely prosecute the case. I repeatedly bowed my head, but that was an apology for the horrific experience of almost being set on fire, and not for my mother-in-law's attempted arson. There was nothing I could do about my mother-in-law's attempted arson. In the end, my mother-in-law's obsession with the house did not spare her from prosecution. I also managed to get her to forgive me by apologizing again and again, and we exchanged promises so that this would never happen again. My mother-in-law had never known poverty, had grown up in luxury, and could have anything she wanted. I think that is why she felt frustrated by the situation where she could not get what she wanted and developed a twisted sense of jealousy. She began to resent both the house and the land, and she turned to crime and ended up in prison. My father-in-law, who was supposed to be a supporter of my mother-in-law, started fighting with her after she was arrested. After my mother-in-law's arrest, they began to fight constantly. He gave up on her and forced her to get a divorce. So when her sentence expired, my mother-in-law's home to return to was completely lost. However, that is the result of her choice of action. My brother-in-law missed his brother. I can persevere because I have my sister-in-law. And he encouraged me. Although I have successfully cut ties with my parents-in-law, I have not lost all of my family. I decided to live a peaceful life for my husband who is watching over me in heaven. What did you think of this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.